Frost still clung to the grass when Staff Sergeant Eli Hawthorne pulled into the small veterans cemetery just outside Cedar Falls. It was barely 6 in the morning, the sky the color of a fading bruise, and he'd come the way he came every year on this date, alone, before anyone else was awake, before the flags went up and the speeches started. Today marked 11 years since his father had been lowered into that ground, and Eli liked having the place to himself before the world remembered to perform its grief. He cut the engine and walked the gravel path he could have walked blind. Rows of white headstones stood at attention like men called to formation, and somewhere past the oak tree, 3rd row, 9th marker, his father waited. Frank Hawthorne, USMC, Vietnam, the stone read, and underneath, a line his mother had insisted on, he carried others home. But as Eli came around the oak, he stopped. There was someone already there. An old man lay curled on the ground at the foot of his father's grave, a threadbare green jacket folded under his head. His hands tucked beneath his cheek like a child who'd fallen asleep mid-prayer. He looked impossibly frail, papery skin, a thin fringe of white hair, a body that seemed to have been folded smaller by 80-some years of gravity. A worn photograph had slipped halfway from his fingers onto the grass. Eli's first instinct, trained into him over 2 tours and a decade of service, was suspicion. Who trespasses on a grave before sunrise? But something about the stillness of the scene, the careful way the old man had arranged himself, like he'd done this before, like this ground was familiar, made the anger drain out of him before it had fully arrived. He crouched down. "Sir," he said quietly. "Sir, you all right?" The old man stirred, blinking against the gray morning light, and for a moment looked at Eli with the confusion of someone surfacing from very deep water. Then his eyes drifted past Eli's shoulder to the headstone, and something in his face settled, like a man checking that the house hadn't burned down in the night. "Frank," the old man murmured, not to Eli, but to the stone. "I'm here, Frank. Told you I'd come." Eli felt the hair rise on his arms. "You knew my father?" The old man's eyes snapped to him, properly awake now, and searched his face with sudden, fierce attention. "Hawthorne," he said. "You've got his jaw, his mother's eyes." He pushed himself up slowly, refusing Eli's offered hand with a small, stubborn shake of his head, and sat back against the headstone like it was an old friend's shoulder. "Name's Walter Mercer. Folks called me Doc." It took Eli a moment to place the weight of that word. "Doc?" His father had said it only a handful of times in Eli's whole childhood, always late at night, always with a bottle nearby and a long silence before and after. "Doc pulled me out of that ditch when half my platoon didn't walk out of that valley. Doc carried me 4 miles on a busted leg of his own. I owe that man everything I ever built after." "You're the medic," Eli said. "The one from Khe Sanh." Something flickered across Walter's face, not pride, but a kind of old, weathered grief. "I'm the one who lived," he said. "There's a difference." Eli sat down on the wet grass without thinking about his uniform, without thinking about anything except that the man in front of him was a living piece of his father he'd never expected to meet. "He used to talk about you. Not often. But when he did, Eli stopped, throat tightening in a way that surprised him. He said you were the reason he got to watch me grow up at all." Walter nodded slowly, looking at the photograph still resting in the grass. 2 young men in jungle fatigues, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like the war hadn't found them yet. "We made a promise out there," he said. "Whoever made it home first would wait for the other one at the gate. Frank made it home. I didn't. Not for a long while. Spent some years I'm not proud of trying to drink that valley out of my head. He picked up the photograph, thumb brushing the cracked corner. By the time I came looking for him, he had a wife. A boy. A whole life he'd built without me in it, and he didn't owe me a place in it. But he gave me one anyway. What do you mean? Thanksgivings, Walter said. And for the first time, something like a smile moved through the lines of his face. 31 years of them. Christmas mornings too, after my own people passed. Your father used to drive 2 hours to fetch me himself, said a man shouldn't spend the holidays alone in a one-room apartment with nothing but a war for company. He'd set a chair for me at his table like I'd always belonged there. He looked up at Eli, eyes bright and wet. You were there for some of them, son. You were just too small to remember the old man at the end of the table. Eli sat with that for a long moment, memories rearranging themselves. A quiet, gray-haired stranger who always brought the same brand of peppermint candy, who never said much, but watched the family with an expression Eli, as a boy, had mistaken for sadness. It hadn't been sadness. It had been gratitude so large it had nowhere else to go. Why didn't you ever say who you were? Eli asked. Your father didn't want a hero in his house, Walter said. He wanted a friend. So that's what I tried to be. He looked back at the headstone. When he passed, I lost the only family I had left in this world. I come out here every year on this morning, before anyone's watching, and I lie down right here like I used to lie down next to him in that valley, keeping watch so he could sleep an hour. Old habits. His voice cracked on the last word, and he didn't try to hide it. Guess I fell asleep myself this time. Getting old does that to a man. By the time the sun had fully cleared the tree line, the cemetery had begun to fill. Families arriving for the town's Memorial Day service, an honor guard assembling near the flagpole, a small crowd of folding chairs facing a podium that hadn't been there an hour before. Eli helped Walter to his feet, steadying the old man's elbow, and didn't let go even after Walter found his balance. The mayor's remarks were the kind every small town has heard 100 times: sacrifice. Gratitude, the debt that can never be repaid. But near the end, she paused, looking toward where Eli stood beside Walter at the edge of the crowd, and asked if there was anyone present who'd like to share a memory of someone they'd lost. Eli felt Walter stiffen beside him, saw the old instinct to disappear rise in his shoulders. But then, slowly, the old man let go of Eli's arm and walked forward, cane tapping against the gravel, every eye in the crowd following him. He didn't go to the podium. He stood in front of it, facing the rows of folding chairs, and spoke without a microphone, his voice thin, but carrying in the still morning air. My name's Walter Mercer, he said. 58 years ago, in a valley most of you have never heard of, I watched half the men I served with die in under 10 minutes. I was the medic. It was my job to decide who I had time to save. He paused, and the crowd had gone utterly still, the way a room goes still when it senses it's about to be handed something it can't put down. I carried one man 4 miles on a leg that wasn't working right, because something in me said that one didn't get to die there. That man was Frank Hawthorne. He gestured, without turning, toward the rows of white stones behind him. His grave is right over there. A murmur moved through the crowd, recognition, some of the older veterans nodding, a few hands rising to cover mouths. I want you to know I didn't come here today to be thanked for that, Walter continued. I've spent 58 years believing I didn't do anything special. Any one of you would have done the same. But what Frank did for me after, that's the part nobody talks about at these ceremonies, and it's the part that saved my life every bit as much as that morning in the valley did. His voice wavered, steadied. I came home from that war with nothing left in me. No family who understood, no people who'd waited for me. nothing but the weight of every man I couldn't save. Frank Hawthorne found me 8 years later, drinking myself into an early grave in a one-room apartment, and he didn't see a hero. He saw a man who needed a family. So he gave me his. He turned finally to look at Eli, and his next words came out steady, deliberate, like a man laying down something he'd carried a very long way. 31 Thanksgivings, 31 Christmases, a seat at his table that never once went empty, even on the years I didn't think I deserved to sit in it. He reached into his jacket pocket with a trembling hand and drew out a folded piece of paper, holding it up for the crowd, though his eyes stayed on Eli. Last month I went down to the cemetery office and bought the plot beside his. Paid for it outright. Because the truth is, the man saved my life twice. Once in that valley, and once at his dinner table, and I intend to keep him company for the rest of mine, and whatever comes after it too. For a long moment, nobody in that cemetery made a sound. Not the mayor, not the honor guard, not the children who'd been fidgeting in their seats minutes earlier. Eli stood frozen, the weight of 11 years of quiet grief suddenly rearranged into something larger and warmer than he'd known how to hold. His father's death no longer just an ending, but the middle of a story that was still being written by a man who had decided more than 3 decades ago that family wasn't only the blood you were born with. Eli crossed the grass and put his arms around the old man, careful of his frailness, and felt Walter's hand grip the back of his jacket the way a man grips something he's afraid might still be taken from him. "Welcome to the family, Doc," Eli said quietly, only for him to hear. "You've been in it longer than I have." Behind them, the flag snapped once in the morning wind, and the crowd, still silent, rose to its feet, not for the ceremony, not for the speeches, but for the old man who had finally, after 58 years, allowed himself to be thanked.